Blog Talk Radio.
What? Oh.
Wednesdays, each and every Wednesday night here live on the award-winning Fantasy Sports Channel. I'm, of course, your host, Jared Fabree, and big plans on the show tonight. We're going to waste no time in bringing in the co-host of the program, Mr. Joseph Everett. Joe, what's going on tonight, my man?
Looking forward to tonight's episode, but more so, Jared, tomorrow night. By this time, we're going to have a few football games in the books, my friend.
Absolutely, and we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up in just a few minutes. Give you guys a quick idea what's coming up on the show tonight. It is usually one of the most heavily downloaded episodes of the preseason. It is our Sleepers and Bust show. We have several special guests tonight. We're going to start in just a few minutes with Mr. Joe Fortenbaugh from the National Football Post. He'll be joining us to give us his Sleepers and Bust, and Joe and I will comment nicely on those. We will play nice, and then we're going to have a new friend I made on Twitter looking up some red zone stats the other day and found a little website called Fantasyomatic, and Fantasyomatic is going to join us on the program tonight as well for his Sleepers and Bust. Well, guys, we have a couple of updates coming up for you in just a little bit. We'll get to the NES Game of the Week update. We'll also talk a little bit about Top Shot. It was a good time last night as we watched our own producer, Andy, vigorously working the phone lines in the back there. Watched his brother-in-law, Dustin Ellerman, compete there. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Another big announcement about my secondary podcast that will be kicking off in a few weeks, and we have some updates to the NFL Mirror League and Ultimate Football Genius. But I was looking at some red zone data the other night, and I was trying to find some good information, and I stumbled upon a little website called Fantasyomatic.com, something that I was not familiar with at the time, but some very interesting stuff there. Was actually named pretty recently as one of the top 10 fantasy football blogs that you need to know about. So I reached out to him, and now he is joining us to give us his Sleepers and Busts. I always like to have as many different opinions as we can on the show. So joining us on the phones from the West Coast, a.k.a. the Best Coast, Mr. Fantasyomatic. How you doing tonight, buddy?
Hey, Jared. How are you, man? Really happy to be here. Appreciate the invite.
No problem, my man. We're always trying to get as many opinions as we can because I think it's best to give people as much information as possible and then let them make their own decisions because, let's face it, in fantasy, you want to have guys that you like. You want to have the guys that you feel comfortable with. Nobody wants to just blindly draft out of a magazine or off of anybody's ranking. So I always feel the best thing to do is give them as much information as possible and then let them make their decisions and live with them. Am I right?
Amen, man. And that's exactly the approach that I like to take as well, too. I like to focus on some of the data, get people as much data as they can, and let them make decisions based on that stuff. So that's really where I'm coming from tonight as well.
And then you got nobody to blame but yourself whenever the guy that you pick
well, that's the other part.
So, exactly. So, well, listen, we're going to start this kind of rapid fire here, and we're going to move through it pretty quickly, but we're going to start with your quarterbacks. I'm probably going to omit tight ends. We had to do that with Joe Fortenbaugh. Tight ends are becoming a casualty of time, so we'll just do the quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. If people want your information, I know they can hit you up on Twitter at Fantasyomatic, just like it sounds, Fantasyomatic, and I'm sure you'll be happy to answer those. So we'll start with your quarterbacks, and I'll just preface this by saying, as I did with Joe earlier, that it's so hard with the over coverage or just mass coverage of fantasy football to really truly find quote-unquote sleepers that nobody's talking about. There's probably somebody that everybody's talking about out there on at least one website. So we're really kind of talking about guys that are value picks, guys that you want to target that represent really good value on draft day. So it's just kind of with that in mind, who are some of your sleepers at the quarterback position?
Well, I'm glad you said that too, because when you're looking at a sleeper, it's not a top guy. These are guys that are going to be floating around the middle of your round. And when you talk about quarterbacks and sleeper quarterbacks, you really got to focus on QB2s. You're not going to find a lot of good value with the guys that are going to be taken in the the top tier. So one of the metrics that I like to take a look at, which I think is kind of an interesting way to look at quarterbacks and kind of project how they're going to be successful, is I look at the coverage safeties that they're going to be facing over the course of the season. And that's the guy that they're faking out with the head fakes and trying to get out of position. And the more success they have against those guys, the better. And the two guys that I saw on the top of my list there, Well, one of which you guys mentioned earlier was Sam Bradford, and I'm just going to, in the interest of time, go ahead and echo the statement on Sam Bradford. I love everything about what he's got going on there. I love that he's looking at a bunch of weak secondaries, and he's got a pretty decent strength of schedule as far as the entire pass defense is concerned for their opponents coming up in 2011. An interesting one, a really deep, depending on how risky you want to go with this one, just a little something to jot down. Joe Fontenot mentioned something about how Matt Hasselbeck is probably just a guy that's going to be standing behind the line for a few weeks before possibly Jake Locker gets a chance down in Tennessee. Whatever quarterback is enjoying the second half of that season over there has the third best strength of schedule for fantasy quarterbacks. And not to mention that, if you double that up with the absolute best matchup of coverage safeties going down the line, it's really kind of a risk pick, just something that you can think about more when you're looking at waivers. But the Titans, it's not such a bad situation. Actually, that offensive line was fifth in QB sacks allowed, and allowed the least amount of hits on quarterbacks, actually fewer than Peyton Manning last year. So that's something that's pretty good for a guy like Jake Locker if he actually gets some time. This is not a guy, I'm going to say that again, not a guy you're going to draft. You're going to get a lot